Okay, when I'm ready. Okay. Okay, right. Well, thank you for coming to this talk. I'm going to be standing here now, but I am going to get behind there pretty quickly, I'm afraid, because this has been a really big learning thing for me today as well, because even though I am a psychologist, I'm a positive psychologist, I know about positive education, I work with students who've got neurodiversities in higher education, actually, a lot of the background that I've found for today has involved a lot of learning. So I've got a lot of notes because I want you to leave this session actually with something that you can action as soon as you go back to your educational institution or whatever you're going to use this for. So what am I going to talk about? Well, really, I want to take a very practical look at how positive psychology and positive education can be a really effective strengths-based approach to working with all students, including those with special educational learning needs. I want to also have lots of opportunity for discussion and reflection. I have got an activity, but I'm just going to play it by ear and see how it goes. But I think the one thing that's really important for anybody who's thinking about implementing anything new into their practice is that they don't have a barrier straight away in terms of how much training is required, and the cost isn't the big factor. So I'm hoping that what I'll do today will help with that. Okay, so just a little bit about me. I can stay here, I know me quite well. Yes, I am a psychologist. I entered academia as a second career, so I started as a mature student. I worked in training before. I was always interested in psychology. I was very lucky to get a PhD funded after I did my undergraduate degree. And ironically, just like one of the founders of positive psychology, Martin Seligman, I started looking at the deficit approach. So I was interested in the effect of stress on memory. But when I was introduced to positive psychology, which actually happened when I was in South Africa at a conference with people who had had the most traumatic lives, telling me about something which gave them power and strength and made them smile all the time, that everything that I was really interested in came together. The training side, the psychology side, but most importantly, the empowerment side. I'm a teacher or an educator. I work in higher education. I'm a parent, so my child doesn't have any special educational needs, but I've experienced some of the things that he's gone through growing up and from the friends that he works with and played with who had those sorts of issues. But I'm also a researcher. So I'm one of those people who's kind of become a bit of an all-rounder, but most importantly, I'm still learning, and I love that. I have that love of learning, and I think we've all agreed today consistently that that's so important. So one of the things that I found when I was kind of reading around what I was going to put into this sort of workshop presentation was this little quote, and it just summed it up really. It makes it really clear that we have this mindset where we focus on what's not working, what's wrong, what do we need to fix? And that's something that people tend to think about when they're thinking about some of the challenges that people might have who've got learning needs. But what about if we suddenly changed our mindset and we focused, as we can see here, on the strengths and skills and the positive things that come from being somebody who's got a special educational need approach to their learning? So this came out really nicely for what I want to talk about today. And one of the things that we talk about in positive psychology are these sorts of questions. And this is quite alien to psychologists because for over 100 years, we've been asking what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, how can we make something normal without actually thinking about, well, actually, what about flourishing? And what about those people who haven't got maybe some of those challenges? What about those people who've got challenges and have also got strengths? So what is that we are missing by just looking at that deficit approach? And that really is what positive psychology is all about. Positive psychology was founded by Martin Seligman, and we heard this morning about learned helplessness. So he's the Martin Seligman who identified learned helplessness. What he's now recognizing is actually we can learn optimism as well. So he's almost changed his whole approach. And that kind of resonates very much with me, working initially looking at stress and now looking at positive emotion and flourishing. It's a science. Positive psychology is like any other aspect of psychology. It complements it. It does not deny that bad things happen, but what it is interested in is what is it that makes life most worth living. And it focuses on what's right with people, what makes them strong, what contributes to their well-being as opposed to fixing their illness, and also what leads to resilience and optimal functioning. It's interested in these 4 particular areas. So it's interested in positive psychological states like happiness, joy, positive emotion, humour. It's also interested in traits, so talents, interests, strengths, etc. It's really interested in positive relationships. And I know that that's something that's been talked about today, that relationship side, which can be such a challenge with people with special educational needs. But most importantly, it wants to look at systems and institutions. So it's now starting to recognize that actually we need to recognize the places, the structures in which these things happen. According to positive psychology, we can achieve flourishing through 5 components, and you can see them actually identified here. So first and foremost, positive emotion is important. So when we're thinking about positive emotion, we're thinking about happiness. But when we think about happiness, there's lots and lots of other explanations for why we will be happy or not. Also, happiness can be short-lived. It can become something that we become desensitized to. And we think about hedonic happiness as well when we're thinking about positive emotion. But what PERMA also recognizes is that for a good life, we need to have a life of engagement. So that's a life where we are so in touch and so in that zone of what we're doing that we're totally engaged in what we're doing. We need to have positive relationships. So we need to have strong connections with other people. We need to feel that love. We need to feel loved and supported. We also need meaning, and we've heard a lot about meaning, we've heard a lot about purpose. For true flourishing, we need to have that meaning and purpose in life. We need to feel that sense of connection to something larger than who we are as individuals. And we also need a sense of achievement or accomplishment. So we need to have that sense of mastery, that feeling that we've achieved something. And that could be something that's quite small, but it can also be something that's much bigger. But it's also about goal setting and feeling that we can achieve that and we have the ability to reach those goals as well. One of the important tenets of positive psychology is that PERMA and well-being can be learned. So what it is saying is that actually this isn't something that just happens or doesn't, or that some people have and some people don't. It's something that we all have the potential to learn. And as a result of this, from positive psychology, we've now got a strong evidence base that is showing how we can apply different approaches to achieving PERMA in our lives. And what we also know as well is that when we're focusing on achieving well-being, we can be focusing on things like our behavioural aspects, we can look at our health outcomes, we can also look at it from a much more global and inclusive perspective as well. So it's really important when we're thinking about what positive psychology is able to tell us, it's saying we need all of these things in our lives. The other thing that's really important when we're thinking about positive psychology and positive education in particular is the power of positive emotion. So if we're all thinking about, how we feel when we feel good, when we feel happy, how it affects our learning, then actually, you'll probably all think, well, actually, I feel a lot more motivated or engaged when I'm feeling in a good mood. But what we also know from this particular theory is that having positive emotion allows us to be much more creative. And that can be really powerful when we're thinking about problems and how to overcome them. So what we know is that when we have positive emotion, that broadens our way of thinking. That ultimately leads to new ideas, new ways of doing things, new relationships. As a result of that, we're then able to start developing a toolkit of our own personal resources that we can use to help us overcome things like adversity. And ultimately, we can get these lovely effects like enhanced health, survival, and fulfillment. But what also can happen is that that spiral effect continues, because that then produces more positive emotions, and it goes on and on. So this is something that's really important when we're thinking about positive psychology, and in particular, why positive emotion, having something that's enjoyable in what we're doing in our learning, is so important, because that leads to enhanced creativity and better problem solving as well. So what is positive education? Very simply, it's the application of positive psychology within educational settings. And like positive psychology, it complements traditional approaches to education by combining both the concepts and the scholarship of positive psychology with best practice guidelines for education. One thing that's also really important with positive education is that it explicitly teaches skills for well-being. So this is where we're seeing a curriculum that not only focuses on the academic side, but as part of that is also developing those skills that are so important for well-being and the upward spiraling effects that those can have. Positive education, as I mentioned before, excuse me, sorry. Why am I so nervous? Thank you. So, like I mentioned before, positive psychology focuses on the 4 areas, and as we can see here, it also wants to address that within positive education. So the focus, yes, started out to be on students, but then it recognised that actually you can't have teachers teaching well-being if they don't have good well-being themselves. And most importantly, you can't experience well-being as a teacher or a student if you don't have that whole school or community environment as well. So as we are learning more and more in positive education, and we're now in its third decade of development, we're recognising that positive education is something that everybody related to that learning experience should benefit from. It's an area that is fast developing. And one of the beauties about it being a new subject area is that there's lots of available resources that are freely available for people to tap into. So I'm going to give you some links to some of those as well. It's also something that is being recognised as being inclusive globally. And one of the criticisms that we've always had of psychology, including positive psychology, is that it just tends to focus on those weird populations. So when I'm talking about weird, I always have to remind myself of what this is. Weird, we're talking about westernized, industrial, educated. Ooh, it's gone, it's gone. Nope, it's gone. But the weird population has always been basically the westernized society is what we've been basing our research on. But now we're recognizing that things like positive education can be applied all over the world, globally, in the Eastern culture, in the Western culture as well. One of the things that positive psychology has taught us is that all of us are a mixture of strengths and weaknesses. So as I mentioned, positive psychology does not deny that bad things happen. In fact, it recognizes that we have to have the normal things that happen in our lives for positive education and positive psychology to actually give us well-being. It almost grounds us as well. But what we know is that nobody has it all and no one lacks it all. And that's a really important message to sort of take forward when we think about maybe some people who've got learning challenges. Okay, every one of us has got a mixture of strengths and a mixture of weaknesses. So as I mentioned, lots of research is starting to be carried out looking at positive education. And we're seeing lots and lots of benefits. Now, this list here just shows you some of the benefits that the research is starting to show. But what we are also finding is that in addition to providing us all of these benefits in terms of our relationships and our well-being, positive education is actually having academic success too, which is showing that strong link between the well-being of the learner and the learning institution and their success academically as well. And I think that that was something that was mentioned this morning, is that once you've got the well-being side right, the academic achievement is much easier to achieve as well. We hear an awful lot about mental illness, more so today than ever. And actually, this is a really big issue that schools are having to contend with. Positive education, by focusing on well-being, can result in a reduction in mental illness. It's also been found to help reduce loneliness, which is something else that we're hearing an awful lot about, and improving the levels of emotion regulation, as well as enjoyment of being alone as well. So it's addressing those issues. Most importantly, it's giving young people that confidence to be able to better manage their emotions and also develop healthy ways of thinking, create a positive self-identity, and help with healthy relationships. And when we think about some of the challenges that maybe individuals with special educational needs have, these are really important areas for them. What's also really important is that the results of positive education are infectious. If you have happy children, you can have happier teachers, and vice versa, because how we feel as stressed educators does impact on how the students feel. But most importantly, as an essential part of that whole school community, the parents get the benefits too. They see their children thriving, they're better, they've got better relationships with their children, and everything starts to have this really positive impact. So what's really important is the holistic approach that positive education can provide as well. As I mentioned, when we think about the challenges of young people with special educational needs, lots of these things are addressed by the approaches of positive education. And one of the important things about positive education is this strengths-based approach. So as I mentioned before, we all have these strengths, we all have weaknesses, but having this strengths approach is really important for those with special educational needs who possibly have been used to people telling them what they can't do and what they can't achieve. So this strengths-based approach allows educators to identify and promote those unique strengths and abilities of young people with special educational needs. And having PERMA, that level of well-being, is really important for helping young people overcome many of the challenges with their learning that they might experience. Also, by utilising this positive education approach, it can help strengthen the students' self-esteem, which was something else that was talked about this morning, give them that sense of belonging, and actually enhance their overall learning experience. So we really are empowering and opening up what our children and our young people can experience by focusing on that well-being aspect. How can it benefit? Well, again, everything I'm talking about now is based on research. Okay, so what we have seen in terms of the literature that's been carried out and produced, and I will mention at this point, there is a dearth of research that looks at the benefits of positive education in young people, especially those with special educational needs. It's an important area for future research for anybody who might be thinking about that. So most importantly, we have got research that shows that positive education can enhance well-being and resilience. We know the challenge for a lot of people with special educational needs is that they have got high levels of anxiety, low self-esteem, and mental health challenges. And by teaching some of the skills of emotion regulation, mindfulness, and different ways of coping, we can help our students manage their anxiety and frustration. Also, by focusing on their strengths, allows them to build their self-awareness and self-esteem by highlighting exactly what they can do and, more importantly, what they're probably really very good at as well that hasn't been noted. Improving engagement and motivation is also important. So again, if we think about some of the challenges that people, students, I'm saying all students really, but those particularly with special educational needs can have, is that they can have difficulties engaging with the standard curriculum because there's lack of motivation, because of repeated struggles, not being heard, not being understood, not understanding may be masking as well. So by allowing teachers to identify individual character strengths and actually enable them to use them and develop them can actually mean that you can tailor your teaching to their interests, increase their levels of engagement, and ultimately motivate them towards achieving an accomplishment. We can also see evidence that shows that applying positive education can help develop positive positive relationships, and ultimately address that loneliness and sense of isolation that a lot of young children with special educational needs feel challenged by, because they're given the skills to make those relationships effective. The emphasis on positive relationship really is so important because it encourages all of those different skills from both partners in the relationship. Things like empathy, understanding, communication, cooperation, and most importantly, respect between students, staff, and even parents. So they can feel more supportive and supported in what they do. Research also shows that positive education can help develop a growth or success mindset. And if you're constantly told about the things that you can't achieve or that you're never going to be able to achieve, then it's very easy to see why having that fixed and deficit mindset can become quite common. Positive education can change that. It can reframe that as well. Also, positive education, by the fact that it is infectious, can also help support staff with their well-being and practice, and ultimately it can enhance communication as well. So that can include communication between student and teacher, as well as between student and parent, because that common language, that strengths-based language, which is something which can be developed, is also something that can be practiced. So what can happen is that the child can learn these well-being sort of skills at school and then go home and continue practicing them and interacting with their parents. So what's happening is everybody's benefiting and everything's being reinforced as well. As I mentioned, one of the tenets of positive education is that teachers need to have good well-being. And that's a good thing to say, but in practice can be a real challenge. But as educators, there's probably many educators here, even parents as well, feeling that sense of frustration can really impact on well-being, particularly if things aren't working or if you're not being heard or there's all of these other challenges going on. So in terms of education, we know that happy and healthy educators are essential for effective education. And the benefits for educators of applying positive psychology have also been identified. So to be able to teach it, you have to have it. And actually by teaching it, you're almost reinforcing the having and the benefits as well. But more needs to be done in this area. And one of the criticisms that you will see of some of the earlier research is this lack of rigor. So that's something that's really important when we're thinking about, am I going to do this intervention? Why should I do this? But this is something that is really being developed. One of the things that's really nice about a new area of psychology, like positive psychology, is that it has to go through these waves of development where you build on the criticisms of earlier approaches. So what's now happening is that all of these criticisms are being applied to actually produce more research that has that rigor, which is often a criticism. So when I'm talking about positive psychology, and I talked about the PERMA theory of well-being, that really is a theory of well-being that is for everything in life. And that is still the foundation of many approaches to teaching well-being within schools. But it's not designed just for schools. And as a result, schools are now, and the education system is now starting to develop their own permeations of the PERMA framework. And these are just some of the examples which you can see in front of you. So, as I mentioned, a lot of them are building on that PERMA framework originally. So if we look at this first one here, I've done something wrong. I pressed the wrong button. Sorry. So here we go. I can go through. It's this one. That one, yeah. Lovely. Thank you. Lovely. Thank you. Okay. So if we look at this one on the top left-hand corner, you can see that it still has the aspects of PERMA, but it also recognises the importance of health. So that essentially is one that's used in schools, which looks at positive emotion, positive relationships, engagement, meaning and purpose and accomplishment, but it also recognises that you need health, for example, diet, sleep, exercise, or vitality. We've also got the Prosper one here. And what Prosper actually did was they have substituted meaning for purpose, and they've added onto that strengths and resilience. So the aim of this model is to build relationships, facilitate positive outcomes, focus on strengths, foster purpose, enhance engagement, and teach resilience. So this is another one that's being used in schools. We've also got the Flourish framework. Now this framework on the right-hand side is actually one which was adapted by a grammar school in Australia where a lot of the early work in positive education was done. And they substituted meaning for purpose and added health. And this little one here, the bottom one, is one which is used in the UK, and it's called Search. And this recognises 6 overarching pathways to well-being. Those include strengths, emotional management, attention and awareness, relationships, coping, and habits and goals. And there's also a version for adolescents as well. So what I'm trying to say is that PERMA is the foundation for many of the approaches to well-being that are being used, but more and more educational institutions are starting to adapt them bespoke to their learning culture. And that's something that's also really important, is that every school might have its own culture. What's really important is that the framework for well-being fits within that culture as well. This one more recently, or this one actually in 2024, recognises that actually, whilst PERMA is an effective framework, it doesn't really give consideration to some of the specific challenges that individuals with SEN might have got. So what this framework does is that it recognises it. It recognises the individual challenges that SEN students might have, and it ultimately has devised the components that gives more bespoke focus on each of those different areas. Okay, so this is, sorry, a very kind of detailed table. I have made my slides available for anybody who wants to kind of look at them afterwards. But this breaks down very clearly what the components of the framework aim to do and why it's relevant to SEN students. And what this table actually does is actually break it down into why it's relevant and which components are most relevant to which different areas of special educational needs. And ultimately, that can be used to direct and focus interventions. Go back again. Okay. So what's now happening is that things are starting to be developed that are directly relevant to the participants that they're working with. And by identifying which particular factors map onto which particular challenges can help with the design of appropriate interventions. And what's really nice from this particular table as well is that you've actually got examples of classroom implementation strategies that can be used to build on those particular areas that might be challenging for SEN students. So lots of frameworks are being introduced, but actually, how do we go about implementing that strengths-based approach? Now, some of you might already be looking at the strengths in your students. And just as a matter of interest, can I just ask, does anybody focus on strengths in the students that they maybe work with? Okay. And can I ask, do you use any particular tools, or is it sort of?
I used the BIA.
Brilliant. Okay, lovely. Okay. How did you find it?
I loved it. It was my, I did my master's in
Okay, okay, lovely.
And I use resource, so sorry.
Okay.
And the what's that? One of the students I met, it maybe is my third doctorate, and I have to complete 2 doctorates. And I have what's it, child psychology, and I met the what's that one of the students disability of it's been the digital what's that problem of the phones and smartphones about that isolation. And they like in the first few days he didn't talk with me, and after that I have videos and everything. And after that, little by little, I have 3 kids, my own kids, I have 3 kids, and I engage with them. He doesn't like to engage with my kids at first stage. And my elder one, he always liked to very talkative and very friendly. However, he started to play with the boy. I told you previously, but after that he started to sing. And he like now he likes to do it, and talking, and I started to do a variety of things now. And now I stopped to talk. He started to talk now, and they use variety of methods, and they use in psychology. It's very important for me that 3 students I have there.
Okay. Okay, lovely. Because this is one of the issues, isn't it? There are lots of different measures around, but you need to have a strengths measure that A, has that robustness that's important, but also introduces a common language. And I think one of the things that's really important about having a bespoke tool, and I'm going to be focusing on the VIA character strengths in a minute, is that it provides a common language that students, that parents, that educators can all use, and it all means the same thing. Because we hear quite a lot, and in my reading around, I've seen the characteristics and traits that we tend to associate maybe with people with different special educational needs, but there's lots of different terms being used. So one of the things that's really important is having that common knowledge. So there are actually two main tools that come from positive psychology, which have been validated for use with individuals with special educational needs. The values in action character strengths, which is the one I'm going to talk about in a little bit more detail, is one of those. And that's the tool that recognizes that actually every one of us have got 24 character strengths, which essentially are positive values, which are sort of positive and valued traits in human beings. Okay. The Clifton Strengths Finder, that's also been validated for use with students with special educational needs, but that focuses on talents. So that tends to focus on themes of talents, and it tends to be something that we associate much more with organisational and occupational strengths as well. So there are tools out there, and the VIA in particular is freely available for everybody to use, that have been validated for those with special educational needs. Okay, and there is a lot of research as well that's been published looking at the benefits of strengths and, most importantly, how to develop our strengths. So when I'm talking about the values in action, I'm talking about these 24 character strengths. And you can see them on this wheel here. I've got a handout which I'm going to sort of give out to people as well. But essentially, these valued positive traits have been separated according to 6 key virtues. And if you kind of look at the wheel, wisdom and knowledge, which is the ones that we would think much more about when we're thinking about education and learning, comprises perspective, love of learning, judgment, creativity, and curiosity. Okay, we've talked a lot about love of learning. But there are also virtues for courage. So if you look at the individual character strengths within there, so you've got bravery, perseverance, honesty, zest. You've got the strengths of humanity. You've got the strengths of transcendence. We've got the strengths of temperance and the strengths of justice. We all have these 24 character strengths, but our top 5 strengths are the strengths where we are at our best. So if you looked at this wheel, you might go, well, I can see what I think are my top 5 strengths. And you could do it as easily as that. But there is a tool that is freely available for you to use, which you could click on this link and it would take you to that tool. And you can find out what your value in action top 5 character strengths are. There's also versions there for young people to use and a guide for how to use it, maybe with students with special educational needs. So as the one thing that you could take away from this particular session today and do, you could access that questionnaire, get your children, your students, yourselves to complete it, and you could start a conversation about what were your top 5, how do you use them, what do I see in you that maybe you don't see in yourself. That's starting that conversation. So my next sort of few slides are really kind of breaking down a little bit more in terms of what these strengths actually relate to. So creativity, and I talk quite a lot about neurodiversity and in my occupational psychology lecture, and how actually the one thing that employers are looking for, creativity, and are not seeing in neurotypical graduates, is actually one of the top strengths that we tend to see in our young people who are neurodiverse as well, which is flagging up the importance of that strength. I think it might be something that you'll often see in young people battling with our current education system if they haven't lost the motivation. They are trying to be creative in their way of learning. As a result, that adaptability, that ingenuity, that way of seeing things in a different light is a real strength that they might have. So it might not be surprising that a lot of people with special educational needs do have that particular strength. When we look at the definitions, it can really give us a greater sense of what we mean or what the VIA means in terms of strengths. But as I mentioned, one of the things that's really important is having that common language that you can talk to your students using, and they will understand straight away what you're talking about, and they will understand as well. Oh, and you will be able to understand what they're talking about when maybe they do some strengths spotting. Okay. So lots of information that actually defines what these different strengths are. What's also really nice to understand is how sometimes the strengths that we have, our top 5, tend to dictate the careers that we go into. So again, talking about potential, this is something that you can talk about with a young person about maybe this might guide what it is that they want to go on and do in the future as well. Okay. So again, you can see a lot of ways in which PERMA's model and the strengths-based approach have been mapped together. And it's by knowing our strengths, which is really empowering. And there's a lot of research that shows that just knowing that you have strengths and knowing what those top 5 can be a game changer when it comes to people who are used to being told what they can't achieve. Okay. Knowing your strengths is empowering, but it's when we're able to use them. And that's why as educators, knowing the strengths of our students can help us tailor approaches to learning that might be much more bespoke to what would work for them. Okay. It also allows that conversation about, well, we know what your strength is. How can I enable you to use that strength in this learning experience? And working together with the student to come up with ideas that are going to work for them. So it's a really, really powerful way of starting that strengths-based conversation. This is something that, again, another article which talks about how important it is for everybody to have well-being, but how surprising it is that so little attention has been given in terms of research looking at well-being within people who might have special educational needs. So again, this is highlighting the importance of us doing more research in this particular area. What we're also getting from this quote is the fact that it is time for special educational policy and practice to recognise and prioritise well-being as part of that learning experience as well. Okay. So there is limited research actually out there, but this is definitely an area that's being recognised as being important. There is even talk about a special educational needs profile. So again, this is a really detailed table here, but that's why I've made my slides available after this presentation. But what some researchers are suggesting is that there is actually a VIA strengths profile for people with special educational needs, and predictions have been made about whether some of the challenges that people with special educational needs have, not because they don't have those strengths, but because they're overusing their strengths inappropriately. And one thing that's really important when we're thinking about strengths use is that actually there is an optimum point at which using, for example, your strength of bravery becomes detrimental. So it's about recognizing that point. And what this particular research profile has done has looked at some of the main challenges that people with special educational needs might have in terms of their emotional strengths to see whether they're mapped onto their character strengths as well. So already there's some recognition coming through about how the strengths that you might have as somebody with a special educational need actually maps onto those strengths that you experience, or those traits and challenges that you experience in life. So again, more research that's starting to come out in that area. What Taylor et al. Actually did was that he found that the strengths that a lot of autistic, so this was looking at autistic students in particular, have got are actually quite similar to people who don't have autism, but the strengths awareness in people with autism is much more reduced. And this is flagging up the need to know your strengths and use them, but that lack of awareness isn't there, or that lack of awareness is there. And what this highlights as well is that it's really important that we adopt this strengths-based approach when working with the autistic population, because they don't know they have the strengths, and that in itself can be very disempowering too. So again, carrying out that strengths activity with your students, introducing that conversation, or even your children, because they have it, you know, parents can do it as well, can be really, really powerful. Are there any strengths which are most important for education? Should there be strengths that you might focus on? Well, you might think that love of learning would be an important strength to have if you want to have academic success. But what the research is also showing here is that it really depends on what you were trying to achieve in that educational situation. Okay, so yes, perseverance and love of learning has been related to school achievement, but actually, for better emotional experiences at school, it's zest and hope. For classroom behaviour, it's self-regulation and prudence. So when you're thinking about interventions to introduce, to maybe improve those areas, that can help you focus on particular interventions, but ultimately, all 24 strengths are linked in some way to a positive experience and achievement in a school environment. So working with all strengths is so important. And I'm very mindful that I'm kind of talking a lot now and everything. I'm not going to give you that chance for the activity, but I really just want to kind of talk about one of the main issues that schools, education institutions have when they start to think about implementing positive education. Okay. The time, the money, support from the top, having that culture that really embraces these different things, having that support from parents, having the opportunity as a parent to know what's being taught in terms of well-being in the school, and you can actually build on back at home so that it becomes a very natural, holistic approach as well. Do I embed a strengths-based approach within the learning, or do I have it as an add-on? Do I have it as an intervention that's separate? These are all the challenges that are reported by a lot of educators about it. And I can say to you now that actually you can start small. Today you could leave knowing that you can actually carry out the values and action character strength survey with yourself, with other people, And that will start that conversation. That will start to enable you to understand maybe how you can adapt your teaching, maybe how you can communicate better with your child, maybe why the child is not responding in the way that you hoped they would respond, because it's a lesser strength that needs developing. So it can help work really well. Learn from others and adapt. I showed you some frameworks. There's lots of research out there. There's links to lots of free research that you can access that are on these slides as well. And that's how people learn. Don't reinvent the wheel. Learn from others, adapt it. Because one thing that's really important is there is no one size fits all. And every institution probably has its own approach to education, has its own culture, has its own values. We've heard a lot about that today. Tweak something that might already be out there and make it your own. And that's why you've got some of the different models coming through, because that's what people have done. Collaboration is essential. Work with parents, work with teachers, work with communities. I think this is already happening. I'm hearing more and more about this today. There's a lot of positive psychology I'm hearing about from you people today already. Good teaching practice probably already does a lot of strengths-based approaches. But actually working together is so important. And the strengths is the way to start that conversation, where you're all talking from the same piece of work. You can introduce it as a mini lesson. So there's research that's shown that actually you can create a mini lesson. This is just one example, which is actually getting students to talk about character strengths and actually think about ways that they've used them and how it made them feel. Maybe how they could use them in a different way. Maybe how they could learn a new strength and develop that. Okay. Alternatively, you might implement an intervention. And I'm flagging up the Hummingbird Project because one of the projects I'm working on is called the Hummingbird Project. It's a 6-week multiple component positive psychological intervention that is freely available and is being applied to primary and secondary schools in the Northwest. Very simple, 6 weeks, 45 minutes, working on the concepts of positive psychology. It's being done in primary schools and secondary schools with a workbook, and it's showing greater enhancement in terms of well-being, reduced ill-being as well, so reduced depression and anxiety, and also improvements in attitudes and engagement within the school curriculum. And the children love it. They do the most beautiful pictures of what they've learned and what their strengths is, and they have strengths pictures everywhere, and it's really powerful. But that's just a very simple intervention that, you know, schools could implement if they had access to it. But what's also talked about is having a whole school approach. Okay, so this again is another example. So this is a whole school approach where essentially it's about learn it, live it, teach it, and embed it. Learn what positive psychology is, and there are little snippets of learning that you can really access quite easily. Live it as educators, teach it as educators, and most importantly, embed it into the whole school approach so that everybody is involved. The whole culture is about well-being. Okay. And when we look at the benefits, the whole school can benefit, but also so can the parents of the children as well. And again, more examples talking about that particular intervention. And I think really I'm sort of bringing it to a close on this one. Key points to think about before applying positive education. And as I've already mentioned, there is no one size fits all. There really isn't. And so individualization and adaptation are going to be crucial. You know your students. You know what's going to work for them. The one thing that's really beautiful about the VIA strengths is that because we all have them, everybody can do these activities together, irrespective. So it doesn't need to exclude anybody. And children can start to talk about their strengths as opposed to their differences as well. And that can be really empowering. Getting teachers on board with anything new, particularly when teachers are so busy as well, is always going to be a challenge. But that's why it's important to have a go yourself. And if you learn what your strengths are, then that can be a lovely conversation to have with the students. Practical implementation, so making it practical, achievable is so important, but also, again, as I've mentioned, that collaboration and communication. And measuring success holistically, okay? What's important when we're measuring success, and unfortunately, it doesn't tend to be something that we have in all of our outcome measures or our performance indicators, is well-being. What's more important, as we've talked about earlier, having happy, well children or having high marks? And at least if you've got that sort of success of their well-being, that's really something that's very powerful as well. But also thinking about ethical considerations. Is this appropriate to do in this particular situation? My activity never happened. But essentially, I just want to kind of leave you with some reflective questions to kind of take away. Okay. As I mentioned, I've heard a lot today of positive psychology in action without giving the name to it. A good, positive learning environment has positive psychology. So think about the elements of positive psychology that you are already using with children and young people, and particularly those who might have special educational needs. And what could you start doing? And most importantly, what would your applications look like? And those are the questions that hopefully some of this information will allow you to start. And I will just flag up lots of resources that are available for you to access. And I had to get the book in at the end, but there you go. Okay, thank you.